thing I can say is we do have lots of people working abroad who send money. Remittance are among the highest sources of income in Africa for families. If you go abroad and you want to send money back, you will obviously look for the well-known ways in which you can send money back to your country, and the avenues that you're offered. Western Union, very high rates that you have to pay for that, and definitely now, in terms of, if you do not know that there are other options, you end up paying exorbitant fees just to send money back home.
My name's Max Gagliardi, and this is Always Be Building. If you're watching this video, take a moment, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, or you can follow me on your favorite podcast app. Hope you enjoy the show. How's it going? Welcome to the podcast.
And thank you for having me, Max.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things to talk about. There's so much going on in Nigeria. There's stuff on the energy front. There's stuff on the money side with the central bank digital currency that they just introduced. It's just a very complex and interesting situation to me. And I think that a lot of these issues intersect in different ways. And so just at the start here, maybe just give some of your background and then we can dive into all these things going on in Nigeria.
Okay, my name is Noelyne Sumba. I am very, I'm a Bitcoin advocate. I'd like to refer to myself as that. I am working towards enhancing Bitcoin adoption in Africa, and currently I'm working with mostly just three projects. I am with Exonumia that facilitates translation of literature, Bitcoin literature, into African languages. And also with Machankura that enables transfer of Bitcoin using USSD platform that is without internet connection. And currently I'm with the Bitcoin layer as an African correspondent. So those are the things I'm currently working on. And yeah, I'm glad to be here with you today to discuss on Nigeria. I personally really love Nigeria. Growing up in Kenya, I have grown up really consuming a lot of Nigerian content, especially in terms of their music and their culture. And I think most Kenyans can really say that they have grown up listening to watching Nigerian movies. So, in terms of being a cultural leader and in terms of being a social leader in Africa, Nigeria is really at the forefront. Wonderful people, very aggressive in terms of not just how they carry themselves out, but in terms of how they advocate for policies in their country, how they advertise themselves in the world. They are really a fantastic country. So when you look at Nigeria, population of Nigeria 213 million, probably as of 2021. GDP around $440 billion, and out of 213 million, we see that around 133 million people are undergoing multidimensional poverty. And for this, we can be able to attest a couple of things. Because looking at Nigeria, it is a country that produces one of the largest producers of crude oil in the world. So we'd expect that, it will be able to prosper economically. But there are a lot of challenges that are facing this prosperity in Nigeria. So we see most of the challenges. One, Nigeria does not have a local oil refinery, so its pricing is at the mercy of the global fuel prices, and this is one of the reasons why we can see energy crisis in Nigeria, mostly pushed by this poor infrastructure, and the investment also in the energy sector is quite low. And another thing is maybe the government policies. So in terms of the poor infrastructure in Nigeria, we see like the power distribution, power production capacity in Nigeria, we can put it at around 13,000 megawatts. But out of this, there's less that ends up in the production of electricity because of equipment failures. There's gas shortages in the country. And
Real quick, what's the contrast between, because you've got a ton of knowledge and you're dropping all this knowledge, but I want to hear the contrast between Kenya, Nigeria, and these different issues, because
yes,
Nigeria was part of the topic here going into this because of the central bank digital currencies.
yes,
I also thought that the energy stuff was interesting. But I would love to hear, as you know, you started it off with some of these comparisons between the two, and
Mhm.
kind of where Kenya's sitting in some of these topics around the Bitcoin side, the money side, the energy side, compared to Nigeria. Maybe start with some of those comparisons, and then we can dive into both.
Okay, so I started on the cultural side. I can attest for sure. Nigeria is a cultural leader as compared to Kenya. Our music and our movies, not so much. Um, but when it comes to energy, Kenya has lots of hydro energy. We are blessed with lots of hydropower. But looking at Nigeria, I can't say that they're not really mostly okay. They don't really use thermal, though they are really blessed in terms of the thermal. So, for example, like they have four rivers, Niger they being among them, that can be able to guarantee them renewable energy if they wanted to. But for us, Kenya, most of our energy comes from the thermal, and besides that, then we can also look at solar distribution. For example, there's around 43% of daylight in Nigeria, but their energy dependence is mostly on the fuel. So it constitutes around
Mm,
like 86% of their source of energy. And with this fossil fuel, of course, there's a lot of infrastructure that's required for production of electricity. As
sure.
compared to Kenya, the distribution network, Kenya is a bit better. I think we have lots of rural electrification ongoing here. That's much better as compared to the Nigeria. And when it comes to also the investment. I think the investment, though the Nigerian government has tried to put in policies to encourage investment into the country, but they're not sufficient. I think when it comes to corruption, both countries, but for Nigeria, I can say it has really hindered progression of energy distribution in the country, and I guess maybe the energy mix is what you can say is a bit quite different because they depend mostly on fossil fuel, we depend mostly on thermal. But I can see a lot of potential in Nigeria when it comes to energy. As I've said, they have lots of solar and they also have lots of thermal energy. Yes, that
That's it's
hydropower
interesting.
energy.
What Yeah, and so what about, like, you were talking about on the, that's a really interesting distinction, I didn't know that, by the way. What about, like, on the cultural differences? I think it's hard for somebody in, the US or maybe in Europe that's not as familiar with Africa,
Yeah,
such a vast continent, so
yeah,
many different, types of cultures, even though everybody may be relatively close, it is a big continent, but
it is
there's
very
countries
big.
that are close to each other, but yet there's
Yeah,
things are so different. So talk about
yeah.
some of these cultural differences, and then we'll dive into, like, the money side as well.
Okay, so when culturally, I believe Nigerians are a bit more outspoken. I think it makes sense why they're more out there as compared to Kenya. We're very soft spoken. But besides that, because of that, actually, we see Nigerians in so many fronts worldwide, and especially in fact of the startup industry in Nigeria. It's among it's actually the highest in Africa. More, we have like around 600 startups as of last year, and if you compare it with Kenya, around 1,100. So there's a vast difference in terms of how Nigeria puts itself out there. There's even a joke I read somewhere that also, okay, because of the poverty levels in Nigeria and lack of opportunities, unfortunately, there's also lots of brain drain from there, and we
Mm,
have most Nigerians leaving Nigeria to look for opportunities abroad. That this happens actually all across the continent, but for Nigeria it's a bit higher. Of course, higher population. And I was saying there's a joke I had about. Like you can be in Berlin and you can throw a stone and it will hit a Nigerian developer because of just how much there's so much brain drain from the country. People looking for better opportunities. So in terms of culturally, yeah, um, I can also say that there's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of interaction. There's lots of Nigerians. I have very many Nigerian friends, even in Kenya, and our cultures. We understand each other's cultures a lot because of consuming it from maybe childhood. They put their life, mostly through their movies and music out there. And yeah, most of us can be able to access it and know what's really happening in Nigeria. Yes.
The digital age with everything, social media and things being more digital, has that created more interconnectedness? And we'll tie this into the money side here in a little bit because I'm really interested in how you got into the Bitcoin space. But just like, do you think that the digitization of life and the ability to have social media, does that kind of made it seem like the borders are closer together now and everybody can kind of interact more in terms of understanding each other's cultures?
Of course, yes, definitely. That is, in fact, it has played a huge factor. We have lots of traveling between Nigeria and Kenya for very many reasons. And social media, right now, you can be up to date with what's happening there. And I think the borders are really opening up. The borders are really opening up. Maybe if we could just start working on the visa requirements better and I believe we can have a borderless Africa for sure. It will take time, but I see it happening. Social media has played a very huge factor in enabling this also. Yes.
So how did you get into the Bitcoin side? What was the how did you, get interested in it, and then from getting interested in it then decide to want to do education on it?
Okay.
What was that path?
My Bitcoin journey. I live at the coast of Kenya. This is Kilifi County, and I personally I have a background in financial engineering. I studied it in campus, and initially I had a personal problem because as a result of the 2008 financial crisis, and with this I always knew at the back of my mind there's a problem somewhere. I could see the bubble, but I didn't really get in-depth knowledge until maybe I went into university education, and of course with that deep dived a bit more, and I found out about Bitcoin in 2015. But when it came into the country first, I was doing the tap to pays, and I was, you know, just mining a bit. I lost that wallet, unfortunately, with the sats that were there. But fast forward around 2021, I had living at the coast. I interact with lots of tourists that come to Kenya, and I met one who was traveling on Bitcoin, and they were like they had just left everything, and cryptocurrency was the way they earned. And I was curious, how are you doing this? This is
Yeah.
I'd like to learn. And then they mentioned Bitcoin, and then I realized, wow, I must have missed something on Bitcoin back then. And so I went back and I understood the financial system now in depth, saw the cracks, delved deeper Austrian economics, and yeah, here we are right now. And I just started out on social media, and I met Bitcoin Twitter, and right now, so far the best decision.
What's the what's it like culturally in terms of how people view Bitcoin in Kenya as well as in Nigeria? Because I know Nigeria has tried to do this central bank digital
Yeah.
currency, and I think a lot of people have considered it a failure. And and I've heard reasons why they think it failed. How do you view? We can get into that in a second, but first start off with Kenya and how they think about Bitcoin. What's it like there? How do they think about digital payments in general? Is it more cash based society? Is it more digital? Just talk some about how money works in your country and broadly in Africa.
Okay, so maybe for Kenya, maybe I can just get into Kenya because I keep on saying Kenya was a special case because I don't know whether you've heard of M-Pesa. Maybe I can just explain it to your viewers. In Kenya, we personally just make payments through mobile payments. M-Pesa is a platform that was developed to enable this. So for us, payment using mobile phone is not a new. It's not something new. It's something that we've lived with it for quite some time. And how people view Bitcoin, when it came into the country first, it came with lots of cryptocurrency scams, unfortunately. And people viewed it as a scam, as because of the volatility. There were lots of people being promised returns, and which was never fulfilled. And as a result of this, there's a lot of skepticism in the industry. And but with time, I believe, especially for the younger population, We have a very vast network of like online writers, and PayPal is really frustrating in terms of payments here. And people will always look for an avenue. I guess it's just the same case with Nigeria, and lots of fintech came into the picture to facilitate that. But with fintechs, we have banks, which of course make the process still really cumbersome, and cryptocurrency really is quite known, especially among the youth. Uh, when it's Bitcoin specifically, I think we still have a lot to do in terms of that, because people need to understand why not all these other cryptocurrencies and why Bitcoin. There's still a lot to be done in between, and there's also lots of cryptocurrency um, owners who come to Kenya to shield their cryptos. So, yeah, we have a long way when it comes to Bitcoin, but I believe people are aware of Bitcoin. It's really not a new factor here. Yeah, it's not a new discussion. So, going into Nigeria instead, I think the perception with Nigeria, it was still the same, but for Nigeria the circumstances are quite different. They do not have a mobile payment system like we do, the M-Pesa. So with Nigeria, um, on the onset of the pandemic, for example, lots of banks closed down, and with the closure of the banks, um, because the Nigeria system is more of a cash system, there wasn't really easy accessibility of cash, and most people, especially in the rural areas, didn't have access to the banks, and so onset of pandemic, closure of banks, less accessibility, then people will look for avenues. The youth especially will look for avenues, and cryptocurrency, of course, was among the first, because the remittance there, as I've talked, there's lots of brain drain. People need to send money back home to their families, and with that, cryptocurrency became a boom. I think mostly, especially during the pandemic, and then the Central Bank of Nigeria noticed this. So, come February 2021, they barred actually commercial banks from engaging in cryptocurrency. So, as compared to us, where we had M-Pesa, and for us having M-Pesa, it was easy for exchanges like Binance to come into the industry. Because with Binance, you can always just sell and receive money directly to your M-Pesa. So that gap is already closed, and it's easier for cryptocurrency to move around in Kenya, I think, as compared to Nigeria, where you had to like maybe access the commercial bank in order to buy or that. And so with the barring of commercial banks, there came now the option of peer-to-peer trading, and now we find exchanges like Paxful and local Bitcoin. So an opportunity in that, and I think Paxful is quite huge in Nigeria, and in terms of purchasing of Bitcoin, and so after it was bad. Commercial banks were bad. Comes October 2020, 2021. Of course, the reason they gave for this was, the usual fraud and terrorism. Comes,
Right.
yeah, October 2021, then the government decided, you know what, we're launching our own e-naira. So they launched the e-naira, and they gave a reason that they were enhancing financial inclusivity. Mind you, this time, and they want to, move the society towards a digital society, since most remittances are now digital. But with that, there's also the electronic system, Nigerian system called NIBS, that was already underway. So we fail to understand why they decided that. But another thing maybe I should mention on the e-naira, when the e-naira was launched, they used the blockchain technology, that had already launched another digital currency in the Eastern Caribbean, using the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. It was called Dcash, and the Dcash had already failed in the Caribbean. And maybe someone in the Central Bank of Nigeria didn't do the due diligence to realize that there was no hope of this blockchain ever working. And I think the Dcash had left people in a limbo. It had closed down for around 2 weeks. So, in 2 weeks, people
Wow.
couldn't access their cash. And this was information that was already out there even before the recent, even right now, as Naira is still in progress. And so after that, after the barring after the launch of the e-naira, comes now around November 2022. The government of Nigeria decided they want to redesign the naira. So they had introduced the e-naira, but still notes were in use, and they said they wanted to redesign the 200 naira notes, the 500 naira notes, and the 1000 naira notes into new notes, the usual, just to curb inflation that was rising, because inflation in Nigeria at around 21% as per now.
Wow.
And with that, yeah, it's bad. The and Yeah, so redesigning of the notes designing of the notes come December, since there was not much uptake of the e-naira, around 50% of the adult population were against the e-naira. And besides that, there was also, we have talked about the energy crisis, the electricity reach. People couldn't uptake it. So they decided in December to limit cash withdrawals from bank to around $667 per person. Um, it was per person, per person in a
Yeah.
week. And with this, uh, yeah, there was a lot of chaos in the country, of course, because people are now scrambling to get the new naira, and it was a mess. We saw protests break out, the bonfires, the people even sleeping at the banks, waiting to withdraw cash. Then in January they decided to like increase the limits, and instead of foregoing the whole all the old notes, they decided they will keep the lower denominations, and people can now do a cash swap program where they will take the 200 naira notes, the 500 naira notes, and the 1000 naira notes, and change them for either the old lower denomination notes. But also with that, they still kept the cap of 10,000 naira. So this was also still to as a form of bribing people, or manipulating people towards using the e-naira instead. And of course, with that, also lots of chaos. Now that was what caused the chaos that we saw, and all of this is happening while there's an election, incoming
Yeah.
election. Yeah, this was the election they were having was in February, and maybe to say just this was the first election actually in Nigeria where there was there was no military leader, and no incumbent also running, and so there were major elections, and of course the youth felt disenfranchised. They were hoping for change, and this is when now we saw most of the chaos happening, the protests. And fast forward, in April, the president decided that no, so no, the president decided that they were going to push forward the day in which the currencies will be taken off completely from the markets, and he pushed it to April, but the Supreme Court made a ruling that it will happen in December 2023 instead. So the situation in Nigeria, we're still, maybe you can say it's a work in progress in terms of the currency, how we're looking at it and how it will progress. So yeah, waiting. I'm actually also curious to see how that goes.
There's so much to unpack with that. So I want to talk about just seeing the things like the crazy inflation that they have going on,
Yes.
watching what they're trying to do with taking a society that seems like it's mostly cash based and then
Yeah.
trying to move it into digital, but
Yeah.
trying to do it with a central bank digital currency. Like in Kenya, are people watching this really closely? Number one, are people paying attention to this, or is it just somebody like you who's into Bitcoin, who's into the money space? You're paying attention to it, but is like society as a whole, do people, are they watching what's going on? Number one. Number two, are any of these same issues like the inflation issue happening where you're at, or is this just local to Nigeria? I'd just be curious to see how people are taking this in, because it's not that far away. You guys are on the same continent. I mean, they are on opposite sides, but how much are people where you're at focusing on this, and where you are you facing any of the same challenges from inflation issues with the currency, et cetera?
Okay, so and whether people are observing it, yes, sometimes the media reports on this, but it's very minimal reporting because we say Africa is a continent, so Africa is a country sometimes because when we're facing the problems, we're all facing most of the challenges at the same time. So, no,
Mm,
inflation is not just locally in Nigeria. In Kenya, inflation is also pretty bad. In fact, I think our currency is undergoing the fastest devaluation I've ever seen in my lifetime.
wow.
And it's bad. The situation is bad. You talk to people, you don't even have to see. Just recently, on the 14th, on Monday, we had a protest. We were protesting for because of the livelihood. Things are getting very expensive. Fuel is getting expensive, so we were protesting that. Okay, rather, yeah, there was protest for the standard of living, at least for the government to consider and lower the cost of things. So people do have are paying attention, but I think if you do not understand where the issue is, how do you even start fighting? You just say it's this politician or this politician, and maybe and you can't really blame people. We are not. The system is not meant for us to understand what the problem is. So, but a few of us do understand what is going on. We try to be vocal about it, mostly on Twitter, and we hope that we can be able to reach as many people as possible to understand. And the government, with the bailouts they receive from IMF and World Bank, people want to keep the party going, and I do not. I don't know. I want to say that I see this change happening from the top downwards, but I don't see it. So for us, we approach Bitcoin in terms of a grassroots movement. So we start with the lowest that we can be able to reach. It's better because they understand the challenges of money. They're the ones who will go to a bank, try to open a bank account, and receive all these documentations they do not understand. In fact, the language, first of all, is in English. Swahili speakers,
Hmm.
we're around 200 million that are yet to be catered for. In Kenya alone, there's lots of financial illiteracy. You do not understand how you can be able to receive all these financial instruments. I can say it's the same case with Nigeria. I talked about the multidimensional poverty. So education is it's there. Poor infrastructure is also a factor. If you live in an area where there's no electricity equals probably also no low internet connection is in the picture. So you do not have access to social media or the media to be able to gain this knowledge. And I think a lot will need to be done in terms of maybe educating, but with the bottom up approach we are looking at. It will take time, but yeah, we just require lots of energy and positivity for this. Yes.
How does the government where you're at view cryptocurrency or Bitcoin versus like with Nigeria when they saw the popularity rising, they went to make it illegal. It's kind of a gray area. It's not black and white, but they put out basically, I don't know if it was a law or if it was just they put out a statement saying that, banks can no longer exchange with cryptocurrency. But where you're at, being already that there's so much going on the mobile banking side, has the government embraced it more? Have they taken a similar stance, or just what's the general reception to Bitcoin and crypto in Kenya versus, say, what Nigeria has done?
Okay, so our current central bank governor was very against Bitcoin. I don't know whether his stance has changed. Um, we're waiting to see someday. But there is no barring of commercial banks from enabling
Hmm.
transactions, that is for sure. And for us, I can say what works, as I said, M-Pesa, peer-to-peer transaction, there's really no way to stop it. They'll have to stop M-Pesa because if you go to an exchange and buy, nobody can be able to really stop you from receiving money on your M-Pesa as compared to if you're receiving in a bank account and the transaction is flagged. So I think because of that, we are going to be seeing not just Nigeria. Nigeria is already leading in the adoption, maybe because of the CBDC, but also Kenya. We are going to be seeing lots of that. And generally Africa, I don't know about you there, Max, but for us, I'm sure you're going to be seeing lots of adoption here. And the government isn't like directly against it. However, there was a constitution. Although there was discussions on having a central bank digital currency in progress. It was just put up for discussion with the public around late last year, but not so much. Not so much information has been given on it, on how far it went, when the implementation is expected. But so far, no interference that we
Yeah.
can say is a major interference. Yeah.
How much is one thing I heard about Nigeria and with it being so cash based that there's really no process or procedures in place for know your customer KYC, which then makes it very difficult. This is kind of a counterintuitive consequence of not having any KYC is that it makes it difficult to use credit, for example, like to use debt, whether that be to buy property or whether it be to use a credit card or whatever it may be, because there's really no way to trace that person. And if they were to use credit to buy something to use debt and then they left and went to another country, it would be very difficult for them to basically assign that debt to that person, which I'm just wondering, like, is it similar in Kenya? Is there KYC structures in place to make it to where people can use credit more effectively, credit cards, or is it mostly just currency denominated transactions?
Okay. We also there are credit cards, but we rarely use credit cards in transacting, especially internally. As I said, M-Pesa system works quite well. It's impressive because you never realize how impressive it is until you live to another African country and you have to carry out transactions. So
Right.
but in terms of KYC, we do have KYC. In terms debt issuance, there's lots of KYC, and because of that, there is also very limited exposure to debt. And I am sure it has to be the same case in Nigeria. So you find that whoever is closer to the printer receives the money first.
Right.
So yeah, those who are closest to the printer receive debt first, and exactly. Financial inclusivity in terms of credit, it's a challenge everywhere. It is a challenge everywhere, either because of the financial illiteracy or accessibility. So even if you were supposed to talk about Nigeria, people being able to receive credit, as I mentioned, the even when the e-nairas were being okay, so even when the new currency were being launched, there were only two printing places for the currency that was supposed to be distributed to the whole country. That's why there was a shortage. So credit will be a different ballgame that I would expect will be worse. But yes, for here there is KYC in terms of receiving of debt, and that has locked out lots of people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had never really thought about the KYC infrastructure and how that can facilitate a lot more finance, just in terms of the things that people can do versus if you don't have a system. I mean, usually I just have viewed KYC as a negative thing for privacy, but I had not thought about it as a way to facilitate more financial payments and things like that. And I guess it kind of makes sense if there's not KYC structures in place, like in Nigeria, it would limit what people could do because someone's
Exactly.
not willing to extend somebody credit, whether
Exactly.
whatever it may be, if they
Yeah.
can't, track that person, right, and make sure that they can
Yeah.
pay them back.
Yeah.
Um, and I hadn't thought about that, but just talk about like the financial literacy in general. Is that a challenge? And does that cause things like Bitcoin adoption, the understanding of Bitcoin? Is that make it even a higher hurdle to get over for people to understand, what Bitcoin is as a tool if they don't understand kind of the basic financial literacy in general?
Okay, yes, financial literacy is a huge challenge for sure. And one thing I can say is we do have lots of people working abroad who send money. Remittance are among the highest sources of income in Africa for families. And so if you go abroad and you want to send money back, you will obviously look for the well-known ways in which you can send money back to your country, and the avenues that you're offered. Western Union, very high
Right.
rates that you have to pay for that. And Definitely. Now, in terms of if you do not know that there are other options, you end up paying exorbitant fees just to send money back home. With that, we have, okay, in fact, for now, at least I want to say, like, well, for Nigeria, thank goodness, we now have the BitNob app, the Strike and Jack Miller's. Integrated their functions, and now you can be able to send money from the US, UK, and to Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria. That's just a start. I hope more African countries can be able to be integrated into it. So this is a good start. But now there's lots of people who, first of all, don't understand how Bitcoin works by virtue of not even understanding how the financial system works, and reaching these people and telling them, right now you have an option, you have a cheaper option to send money abroad, you have a cheaper option of sending money back home, and but we try in terms of education. So as I said, I work with Exolumia, language also being a barrier, and there's lots of translation going on. There's lots of communities that are forming in terms of Bitcoin communities in countries. At least for now, I've seen there's lots of Africans who are deciding to come together and push Bitcoin education forward. And from there, maybe we can be able to, you know, um, educate as many people as possible on their financial options.
What's really interesting is the remittance point, and that is such a easy to understand, way to approach people about the benefits of what Bitcoin, specifically like the Lightning Network, like what you mentioned with Strike and what Jack Mallers is doing and other people. The fact that Western Union and these other remittancy platforms can charge such high fees,
Yeah.
and a lot of people would say they can almost extort people when they need to send money. They can take such a big percentage of that. To me, that seems like that would be such a great, uh, basically, tool or way to show people, hey, here's some of the benefits of Bitcoin. Is that one of the ways that you talk about it and try to educate people? Is through that? Because if you're saying it's so common, it seems like that would be a great tool or a great topic to be able to educate people on what Bitcoin and the network can do.
Yes, it is, but we started with the energy crisis. The people who need it most don't have even access to the electricity. And
Mm.
if you're using smartphones, very few people already are using smartphones. In fact, the feature phones are more used in most African countries as compared to smartphones. We can say, thanks to Machankura, at least there's an that enables now transfer use without internet connection, but still being able to find someone who will accept Bitcoin. And most people want to receive and maybe sell at the moment, or maybe change it, transfer the Bitcoin to get goods and services. And there's still very few merchants who are accepting Bitcoin, either just around you, the perception around it being a scam, the lack of knowledge about it, and yeah, it is common maybe around among the youth who can be able to access internet and find this information. They always find option. They always find a way around. But there's still a majority of population that, yeah, due to several factors, and cannot be able to receive the benefits that come with this. Yeah.
So that's an interesting point because I've made this point before. There's a lot of skeptics about Bitcoin, and I think that being in the West, being in either the United States or in Europe, it's a lot easier. You don't face a lot of these challenges. So you can go
Yeah.
down, you can get a bank account, you can get a credit card,
Yeah.
you can sign up. Everybody's pretty much got electricity. And people have made the argument to me, and I've said, well, look at these other places like Africa. They could have the benefits of this technology. And one of the common criticisms that I've received is that, well, they have an energy crisis, they don't have access to electricity, how are they going to use Bitcoin? And my response has been, well, you can use it on your phone. But it's interesting to hear from your perspective that even with that, it's still difficult, right? I mean, they have to have
Yeah.
a smartphone, or maybe they can do it on a you called it a feature phone, I think, but like a
Yes.
phone that doesn't have the smartphone
Yes.
capabilities.
Mhm.
um, that's interesting to hear you say that because I've kind of maybe underplayed that issue and said,
Mhm.
well, it's not as big of a deal as it really is. But it sounds like that really is a challenge. And I think that could be a good segue here in a minute to the energy side, back to
Yeah.
that. But
Yes.
just, what are some of the other barriers? Is it really people, they don't have phones, they don't understand it, they don't have the capabilities? Just seems like that is a pretty big hurdle for people to get over.
Yeah. Besides that, I really can't say there's any other major barrier. Hopefully, CBDCs aren't introduced and people are forced into it before we get Bitcoin adoption. But I see if merchants start accepting Bitcoin in Africa, if we have lots of merchants accepting Bitcoin in Africa, and I see that happening thanks to, okay, it's not really thanks to, but due to the factors that are happening. Inflation is over the roof. The shilling is devaluing, so people will now see a need to go into to use a harder currency instead of Bitcoin. So one thing, stablecoins have been an easy getaway. Stablecoins actually in use much more as compared to Bitcoin, I think, around here, and also because it's easy for you to tell someone stablecoin is pegged to the dollar, and people know the dollar. Everybody is striving to get the dollar, so yeah, stablecoins have been huge, but also maybe as people get to figure out, there's inflation, it will be easier. But as per now, I really cannot see any other barrier besides just if enough merchants in Africa accept Bitcoin. I think we're going to see hyper Bitcoinization in Africa even ahead of all the other continents in the world for sure.
That's interesting about the stablecoins argument. I've heard that before as well. Is there a certain stablecoin that's more popular than others? Has anybody been wary or scared of the stablecoins given what happened to some of these crypto exchanges and their coins? Or are people looking to like Tether? I mean, what's the main one that you see people using?
Tether is the main one that people use. Tether is very, very popular. In fact, there's a whole trading industry behind just buying and selling Tether, and I think Tether is one of the contributors to the introductory to cryptocurrency starts from Tether, and right now, maybe as people continue using Tether, it will be easy to demystify Bitcoin to them because they will now understand. It's just like you can use Tether, you can have the option of using Bitcoin, and yeah, Tether is quite popular. I think across the board, Tether is the most popular stable coin that is used.
That's interesting. People wanting to get the exposure to the dollar. Where have you seen like inflation hitting the economy and hitting goods and services the most? Where are you seeing inflation cropping up? Is it energy? Is it food? I mean, are those the main ones, or where are you guys seeing the pain from inflation coming at?
The pain for Kenya, it has to be energy. For Kenya, it's definitely energy and also food. We also import quite a lot of food, but mostly energy. Energy prices are really rising. But even though we have renewable energy, so you can imagine. And there's also food prices. Food prices are skyrocketing, and I think that's the major thing that really led people to protests. And yeah, basically, right now we're just hanging on in real sense. But so I think the sooner we get people to be using a better currency, probably the better, because the devaluation is fast, and I don't see it stopping because more money is still being pumped into the system by the IMF, and we're still taking up more debt, and yeah, the money is just circulating at the top, reaching less people at the bottom.
Do the energy issues? It seems like in the West, everybody's so focused on the climate change narrative, the switching to renewable energy. People don't seem too concerned with the rising energy prices. I mean, I've talked to people in Europe on the podcast, and their energy prices have gone up more so than even in the US. And I've asked them, has this changed, per people's perspective on this push to get rid of reliable energy like nuclear, like oil and gas. And they've said, no, it really hasn't changed people's perspective. People are still very focused on wanting to decarbonize and move to renewable energy. And again, I felt like this is more of a, it's almost like a privileged position because they have, enough energy to where they're not worried about turning the lights on. They can fill up their car. They can get access to it, even though it's more expensive. They can still get it. Are people where you're at? Are they caring about those issues as much, like climate change and things like that? Or are they more just focused on basic, survival and getting the energy that they need?
No, I think that's really not a point of focus right now. And once again, I probably tell them to check their privilege because around here, our concern is just distributing energy to as many places as possible, as many rural areas as possible. We have South Africa with the load shedding. I think it's quite unfair introducing climate when people are going for around 10 hours without electricity. Nigeria, for example, families use generators. It's a norm to have a generator because electricity can go out anytime. Around here, as I said, maybe I can say Kenya is just an exception with the renewable energy, but still it's expensive. So climate really, I don't see it much of an issue. Though there are people advocating for for carbon for the carbon emission. Sorry, I was talking about the yeah the. I don't know. It's a topic I really never want to get into because I
Right.
don't understand. I don't understand. Could we just focus on, first of all, everybody getting energy? Then we could see how we could focus on other things.
Right. No, it makes sense. I mean, like that's the perspective that I would think that you would have. And to the extent that like, renewables make sense when it comes to hydro and the natural resources that are there, then yeah, that makes sense. But to, be opposed to these things, even though they provide so much benefit, it just is kind of a head scratcher to me. It makes me it's confusing because it's like, look, there are all of these people that are in energy poverty and don't have access to the things that other people have, and so it's like you can't really have time to focus on these issues like, well, what happens in 100 years or 200 years? It's like, no, we're worried about what's happening today. Just talk about energy poverty in general in Africa, Kenya, or Nigeria, whichever, obviously where you're at, it's probably easier for you to speak to, but just how does it affect people? How many people don't have access to basic energy? And what is that like and the challenges?
Okay, I can't really go deep into the figures, but in terms of access, rural electrification has really been pushed by the government, especially in Kenya. So most of the rural areas, I can attest, there's access to electricity. Um, or if not, there are plans underway in getting them access to electricity. But connectivity really it's a problem because some terrains may be difficult. At least right now we have, companies like Gridless are making it cheaper for some communities to receive electricity through Bitcoin mining. They're buying the renewable energy from from the companies, and through the mini grids they can be able to provide cheaper electricity to communities. And I think that's more of like a game changer. So sorry, I can't really get into figures, but
No, that's fine.
yeah, but right now cost is a major issue because even if you can be able to access it and not afford it, because most of our payments are now done using tokens, so you have to buy the electricity tokens, top it up. So there might be electricity, but if you can't afford the tokens, well, what next? You'll just have to stay in the dark.
How reliable is it? I mean, when you even if you have electricity or access to it, is it intermittent? Does it turn off and on? You mentioned earlier that
At
maybe,
times.
uh, yeah. So is it like you can't rely on it, even if you can't afford it? You still have to have a generator, right? Most people.
No, that's mostly for Nigeria. For Kenya, no, I cannot say that. But our electricity runs almost Most days I can say we do have electricity, though it goes off, and when it goes off, probably there's a problem with the with the company provider, and you sometimes go for 6 hours without electricity in a day, and of course there's implications to that because businesses are affected, the economy is affected directly. So I'm sure we lose a lot in terms of power outages. Not so regular, but when they do happen, they do happen quite a lot also.
What about banking, where you're at in Kenya? Is it easier to get a bank account, get access to banking? Is it because of the digital payment system? Are people, how are you storing the currency? Is it on that? I mean, I guess explain to me a little bit better how the system works with your digital um, system that you guys have. How does it work? Do you have a bank account? Do you store it
Mhm.
on your mobile? I mean, I just would be
Yeah.
very curious. I don't understand exactly how the system works.
Okay, so M-Pesa uses. Okay, so what made M-Pesa really grow? M-Pesa took advantage of the USSD platform. So USSD is what I think uses for the SMS text messages. So the banking system, you can walk into a bank and you can be able to get a bank account, but as I said, most are not educated, or I've talked to people who they fear walking into a bank because first of all the language barrier. If you understand Swahili, you look at the bank, you're like, oh, probably I don't belong there. So when M-Pesa came, it was like a game changer because M-Pesa also enabled savings. So you can be able to now receive money on your phone, and you can just save it on your M-Pesa. So you'd have lots of people having lots of cash in their M-Pesa accounts. But there's a limit to that, of course, because you don't put banks out of business. So maybe banks are used for international transfers, the RTGS and the SWIFT, accessibility to loans. But yeah, that's also a point of you can a point of argument because as I said, loan accessibility, there's a few questions in it that someone may be able to answer. It's not just accessible to everyone. But the banking system, how the banking system really, I can say, just facilitates cross-border remittance as such. Internally, it's M-Pesa. Yeah, M-Pesa. You go
Is
to
it
a shop, you can be able to pay with M-Pesa in any merchant. Any merchant in Kenya will accept M-Pesa.
Is it what about privacy with it? I mean, is M-Pesa used by the government to track, or is the government involved with it? I guess, or was it a private phenomenon that it came about? Like just the origin of how the payment system came about? Is the government using it? Is there privacy with it? Are people concerned at all with the privacy aspects of it? Or just talk to that a little bit.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned because at least until I found out about Bitcoin is when I started questioning M-Pesa on that because we were okay. So M-Pesa is run by a private company. This is Safaricom. It came as a telecommunication company, so we already had the numbers. We had the phone numbers. They were just integrating a new service into it, and we hope that there is no surveillance, but of course, where there's a company in control of your transactions or can be able to view your transactions, government interference is inevitable. And I even believe if the government would like to implement CBDC, M-Pesa will be like a very good platform for them to work with because it's already in use by most
Mm.
of Kenyans, and privacy should be a concern. But then again, people are already in a position where it serves them. They really cannot question whether the government will be checking out your financial transactions or not. And I think that's where we're at. So it's been running for all these years. Of course, there are cases of fraud, that identity theft. There's a loss of funds. So lots of complaints on that, but it's the only running option we have for now. So most of these issues are just brushed off, and it's where we're at with it.
What about tax on the tax side? how did taxes work in Kenya where you're at? Are they going after people in terms of, is it a sales tax? Is it income tax, property tax,
Yeah.
capital gains taxes? I mean, what are the different types of taxes, and how does that work within the digital payment system, remitting those?
Okay. So income tax is voluntary. So for us, I don't know. The bank doesn't is not in charge of your tax. You are in charge. So it's voluntary system. You have to go and declare your tax returns every year before June, and with that declaration of tax, there's capital gains tax. Okay, the corporate tax 30%, capital gains tax 15%, ranging depending. Um, I think for taxation, there is a challenge though that was recently. There's a problem. Okay, there's something that they're contesting that was recently introduced. They now want to start taxing money that we send via M-Pesa. So I'm sending you money, I'm sending my mother money, but tax has been introduced into it. That's excess tax. We have VAT, value added tax, of course, importation and exportation away from the digital system. So the bank has to be involved there. But in terms of using M-Pesa, introduction of tax. But there's a challenge, of course, as I've mentioned. You wouldn't know whether this person is sending money as a result of a transaction or a gift, or it's dire need. You're supposed to pay the hospital, then you're having your money taxed. So that is one thing that is it's being I think it's being fought over in court. The government wanted to introduce it, and but besides that, all the other taxation, it's declare your returns and your file and tax is paid from that.
Are people generally pretty good at, being honest about remitting the right amount of taxes, or is it something where it's a challenge for the government, given that it's voluntary, to collect the appropriate amount, and therefore they could start using this digital payments network to start policing that, basically? Just wondering like how effective the voluntary aspect of it is.
Ah, okay. It's interesting you're bringing that up, my sector. So there was a tax introduced called digital service tax, and this was aimed towards the Instagram, Facebook merchants, and
Hmm.
they were hoping that it will be voluntary. You carry out your transaction and you go and report your taxes and your tax from there. But unfortunately, there is a high level of tax avoidance. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think the government is having quite a difficult time having to tax these digital payments, and it is a major concern I can see from the government's point of view, because not everyone will come and declare, and I know this firsthand. I've worked there a bit, so and even if they're declaring, and you have to trust what the person is telling you is true. But you have no means of confirming that if there are no bank transaction, if they're using M-Pesa, and M-Pesa can have thousands of transactions in a year. No one has the time to go through each and every transaction and know this was sold, this wasn't sold. So we have been working you have been working with it. We can obviously it's a major challenge. Now most of our taxes come from importation, exportation, the custom side. In terms of domestic, there's still a lot the government is trying to do, especially with the digital age, where there's lots of remote workers now. The youth are not working in offices, very few, and also we have a huge informal sector, very huge. In fact, it encompasses a bigger number than those who are formally employed. And with this, also use M-Pesa. So taxation, major problem, major.
Yeah.
But yes.
How did you get involved with the Bitcoin layer, and what are some of the topics that you plan to cover here in the next months and years ahead?
Okay. So with the Bitcoin layer, as I told you, I'm with Exonumia. We carry out translation of the Bitcoin content into African languages. I'm a Swahili translator, so I carried out translation of Nick Bhattia's book, The Layered Money, the Layered Money into Swahili, and when once I did that, we had a conversation, and he mentioned that I could come around and speak on topics, and I was glad to do it. So here I am now.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Well, it's great. I'm glad we got to connect. I mean, these are things that, hopefully I kind of stumbled through some of the questions a little bit because I'm not as educated on everything that's going on where you're at.
yeah,
And it's been super interesting to me to learn about these things. And I think as we were going, I was thinking of more questions to ask you because it's just not something that I think about every day.
yeah.
And hopefully the listeners got, that from it as well. And they learn more about the situation that Kenya, Nigeria, and Africa in general is in, because I think it's just something that people here in the US, we're not thinking about it every day.
It's
And
true.
so I think this is a fantastic episode. And just want to thank you again from coming on. For coming on? What's the best place for people to follow you and to find your stuff at?
Okay, I'm mostly on Twitter at Noelyne Sumba. I'm sure it will be easy to to find my profile. Yeah, just
Yeah.
my name at Noelyne Sumba, and yes, you can always reach out. I'm there.
Well, Nylan, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time.
Okay, thank you for having me, Max. I appreciate it too.